Hey, what's up everyone? This is Rakesh from motionhistory.com and welcome back to another brand new After Effects tutorial. Instagram stories have become an essential part of our daily social media experience, captivating our attention with their vibrant visuals, engaging content, and behind the scenes sneak peeks. Whether you are an avid storyteller, a business owner, or simply someone who loves to connect with their friends and followers, then this video is for you. So now, let's take a look on the preview. It doesn't matter whether you're a seasoned motion graphics designer or someone who has just started out his creative journey, this video is for everyone. Cause we will go through the concept of creating these stylish and creative grunge stories within a few minutes, and the complete process is gonna be super easy and fun. So just stick around so that you can supercharge your Insta game and tell your stories like never before. So now, without any further ado, let's quickly roll the intro and jump straight into the After Effects. Alright, here we're in After Effects, and like we always do, we'll start by creating a reverse composition of 1920 by 1080, that is 1080 by 1920 with 30 fps, and for the duration we'll keep it at 15 seconds with the background color as complete black, and let's call this composition as maybe a story, and then hit OK. And now before we start our work, we have to import few assets first of all, so quickly go to this file, import, click on file, and let's navigate to the folder. Here we have all these assets, which includes image of textures, brushes, and element patterns, and everything that can be used to create a nice grunge Insta story. Okay, so quickly select all of them and then hit open. And don't worry, we are not going to use everything that we have imported here, but you can of course get all of these assets along with the project file whose download link has been mentioned in the description box below. So don't forget to check it out if you want to follow along with this tutorial. Okay, so now let's quickly drag this preview window all the way to the right like this, and let's manage the workspaces accordingly, and let's keep this at fit. And then let's quickly organize our project window. So quickly create a new folder and let's call this as assets. Okay, and then just select all of the folders excluding the story comp and just drag this into the assets folder like this. Alright, and now just do a right click anywhere in the timeline, go to new and click on solid, and we'll keep the color as complete white, hit OK, and it's fine if you just call this layer as white solid and then hit OK. And after this we'll quickly go to this composition, click on new, and we'll call this composition as animate with the same settings, hit OK. And inside this composition we are going to use an image of a brush first of all, so quickly expand this assets folder, go to brushes, and we'll drag this third image into the timeline, and then press Ctrl or Command D on the keyboard to duplicate the layer 3 times like this. And we can also turn on this transparency mode, and let's bring down the magnification ratio to 50% like this. Okay, and then make sure the layer is selected and then hit S to see the scaling properties, and let's scale this up to 106% and then hit R to see the rotation, and let's rotate this by minus 100 degrees like this. Okay, and then we'll simply move this layer a bit to the right like this, and in the same way we'll select the second layer, hit S to see the scaling, and we are not going to change the scaling as of now. So then hit R to see the rotation, and we'll again rotate this by minus 100 degrees like this. Okay, and again move this a bit to the right like this, and then for the third layer we'll hit S, and let's bring down the scaling maybe by 5%, so 95%, and then hit R, and we'll rotate this by around 82 degrees. Okay, and then we'll again drag this a bit to the left like this, and a bit more, and then for the fourth layer hit S again, and we are going to again keep the scaling as 95%, and then hit R to see the rotation. And again let's bring down this, rotate this by minus 100 degrees. Okay, and let's bring this to the left again like this. Okay, and maybe this third layer should be right here, and I think we should also move the second layer a bit like this. Okay, and now let's select all the layers, hit R to close the rotation, and then go to Effects and Presets tab. And by the way, if you don't find this tab on a screen, you can always go to this window and make sure this Effects and Presets is checked. Okay, and now let's search for an effect which is called Gradient Wipe. Just do a double click to apply that on every layer. And then before we start dropping any keyframes in this composition, we need to have one more composition. Okay, so quickly go to this composition, click on new, and we'll call this as map. Okay, with the same settings, and then hit OK. And inside this composition, we will first of all drag an image of a texture, which I think can be found under this textures folder. Yeah, there it is. Just drag this gradient map into the timeline, and then just do a right click, go to new, and let's create an adjustment layer. All right, and then on this layer we'll search for an effect which is called gradient ramp. This time just drag this onto the layer like this, and then we'll drag this point to the left like this somewhere here, and this other point to the right, something like this. Okay, and simply change the mode of this adjustment layer to multiply. Okay, and then we'll quickly jump back into the animate composition, and now let's quickly bring in our map comp into the timeline like this, and then go to Effects and Controls window, select our first image layer, and in the settings of gradient wipe we'll set this gradient layer to map, and we have to do it for all of the layers. So quickly just select the third layer and set it to map, and the last layer as well. Okay, and now it's time to play with the keyframes, so make sure to stay at the very beginning, and then select the first image layer and just change this transition completion value to 50 first of all, and then drop a keyframe, and let's go to somewhere around 20 frames I guess. Yeah, and decrease this value back to 0 like this, and then hit U to see the keyframes that we have just dropped, and just copy all of them and select the other layers as well, and just simply paste it. And if we just hit U, we can see that the keyframes are here. Okay, now just don't forget to turn off the visibility of our map layer. Okay, and now let's quickly scale our timeline, and then we are just simply going to move our layers few frames forward in times, like let's quickly place this first layer to around 6 seconds, and for the fifth layer let's keep it at around 14 frames, and for the third layer let's keep it at maybe 8 frames, and we're not going to move the fourth layer. Okay, and now if we do a scrub preview, we will see this kind of animation, which looks really cool at the moment, right? And now let's get back to our story composition, and we will again use the same gradient ramp onto the solid, and then in the settings we'll change the start color using an hex code which is 3b 3b 3b. Okay, and for the end color we'll use another one which is 3 times 15, that is 151515. Okay, and we'll change the ramp shape to radial ramp and increase the ramp scatter amount all the way to 80. Okay, and then just drag this point somewhere right here, and the other point right here. Okay, and after this we'll get back to the project window and quickly bring in our animate composition into the timeline, and just change the track matte of this white solid to alpha matte. And by the way, if you don't see this track matte options in your timeline, don't forget to click on this toggle switches modes and it will make it visible again in your timeline. Okay, and once we are done with dragging this animate into the timeline, it's time to bring in a new image of a texture, which is texture.jpg. Just drag it into the timeline and again we'll put this animate on top of the image and just change this track matte of image to alpha matte like this. Okay, and just select this layer, I mean the image, and we'll search for an effect which is called invert. Just do a double click to apply that up, and the other one we'll search for is the curves. Okay, and just drag this into the window. And as we can see that this texture is a widescreen image, so we might have to rotate it first of all. So just hit R on the keyboard to see the rotation, and let's rotate this by 90 degrees and then hit T to see the opacity, and we'll bring down the opacity down to 30% and then hit S to see the scaling property. And I think we should scale this down to 60% like this, and then in the settings of curve we will just tweak this curve a bit something like this so that we can have a bit of darkness in our scene. And now if we do a scrub preview, we will find this type of animation, and I think we have done a pretty good job. Okay, so now what we will do is we'll do a right click to create a new adjustment layer and then hit enter on our keyboard to rename it, and let's call this as glitch. Okay, and on this layer we'll search for an effect which is called displacement map, which is available under the distort. So just drag this onto the layer, and then in the settings we'll keep this map layer at glitch, and for the maximum horizontal displacement we'll set this value to maybe at 10, and we'll set this to blue, which is used for vertical displacement, and then we'll set this value to 9. Okay, and after this we'll go back to this project window and drag this animate into the timeline once again like this. Okay, and turn this layer off as well. So now let's create a new solid and let's call this as red solid, and for the color we'll go with an hex code which is CA2047. Okay, and then hit OK. After this we'll drag a new texture into the timeline which is texture2.png, and we'll place it right above the red solid like this. And before we do anything else with these two layers, we have to create a new composition. So quickly just press Ctrl or Command N on the keyboard, and let's call this as map 2. Okay, and we'll keep the settings same, hit OK, and inside this composition we will drag an image of a brush which is first image under the brushes folder, and then let's turn on the transparency mode so that we can see what's happening, and then just select the layer, hit R, and let's rotate this layer by 90 degrees and then hit S, and we'll scale this up a bit like this, and let's move it to the left. Okay, and then again create a duplicate and then just drag it somewhere here, and we can also decrease the scaling a little bit like this. Okay, and then create a new duplicate and we'll cover up our composition something like this, and I think we can move our first layer a bit more to the left like this. Okay, and now just select the third layer, hit R to see the rotation, and we'll rotate this by minus 90 degrees, and I think we should again keep it to the right like this. Okay, and then what we can do is we can create a new adjustment layer, and on this layer we'll search for an effect which is gradient ramp. Okay, we have already applied this effect a lot of times before, so just drag this gradient ramp onto the layer or into the effects window, and then just change this mode to soft light, and let's drag these 2 points somewhere here and this one right here. Okay, so now let's get back to the story composition, go to the project window, and we will drag in our map 2 into the timeline, and let's place it at the very bottom, and then just select the first layer, and on this layer we'll apply the same effect which is gradient wipe. Just drag it onto the layer, and then in the settings we'll set this gradient layer to map 2, and after this we'll simply turn off the visibility of the last layer which is map, Okay, and then for the solid layer, we'll set this mode to multiply and also the track matte to alpha matte like this. Okay, and now if we want to see the map through the layers, what we'll do is we'll simply select this texture to go to the effects window, and in the settings of gradient wipe, we'll simply increase this transition value to around 7 or 8%. And again, if we just move into the map to composition and let's make our layers overlap onto each other like this, we can see that in the story composition that it is actually making our layer invisible. Okay, and it's just because of the darker area. And if we again put it back at its place, the layer would become visible again, right? And this is how this gradient wipe is working at this point of time. Okay, so now let's go back to the project window and just select this red solid, and then let's quickly decrease the width to something like this, and then decrease the height as well, and let's place it somewhere here at the bottom left corner. Okay, and we will do one more thing is to just select this texture and we'll decrease this transition value down to 0 for a while so that we can see this layer very clearly, and then hit S to see its scaling, and let's bring down this to 40% like this. Okay, and just place it at the left corner like this. Okay, and then make sure to stay at the very beginning of your timeline, and then we'll set this transition value first of all to 50%, and then drop a keyframe, and let's go to around 2 seconds and 20 frame, and let's bring down this transition value down to 5 or 6%. All right, and then let's move the red solid layer to 20 frames and the texture to maybe around 1 second and 15 frames. Okay, and now in order to get a nice grunge on our red solid layer, what we'll do is we'll simply move into the map to composition and just select these textures, and let's move them a bit to the right. Okay, and then we'll select the third layer and let's move it a bit to the left, and then hit R to see the rotation, and let's rotate this a bit so that it gets somewhat parallel to the second layer, and let's place it like this. Okay, and now if we go back to the story composition, we can see that now we have got this type of line and it looks really nice. Okay, so now let's again quickly keep it at 50%. Okay, and now we'll create a new solid and we'll keep the color as complete white. Hit OK, and it's fine if we just call this layer as white solid only. And then let's go to the project window and we'll expand this brush folder, and we'll drag in our 7.png, which is nothing but an image of a brush stroke, as we can see right here. Okay, and then just select the white solid and we'll simply decrease the height like this, and then we'll open up our align window like this, and then just place it at the very bottom of our composition, and then we'll drag our brush stroke right above the white solid, and then hit S to see the scaling, and we'll decrease the scaling by 20%, that means 80 in total, and then hit R to see the rotation, and we'll rotate this by 60 degrees. Okay, and after this we'll quickly change the track matte of white solid to alpha matte. Okay, and then we'll move the layer to around 1 second and 15 frames, I guess, which is right here. Okay, we'll also move this white solid to 20 frames, and then just apply the same gradient wipe effect onto the brush stroke. And then in the settings, we'll simply set this gradient layer to map to first of all, which is nothing but this last layer. And then we'll make sure that we are at the very start of this layer, and then just increase the transition completion value to 30%, and then drop a keyframe and go to around maybe 3 seconds and 10 frame, and we'll decrease this value down to 0 like this. Okay, and after this we'll hit U to see the keyframes very properly, and then select both of them and hit F9 on the keyboard to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor. And if your graph editor doesn't look like this, then make sure you're working in the edit speed graph, not in the edit value graph. Okay, and then just select both the points and hold shift on the keyboard and drag this handle to the left like this, and we'll make this graph a bit like this. Okay, and now we can go back to the timeline, and now if we see the preview, we have something like this. Okay, and this looks nice. Yeah. And after this, what we'll do is we'll create a new solid and we'll change the background color using an hex code that we used earlier, which is CA2047. Okay, and then we can rename this to red solid only. And then let's make the room first of all. Okay, like this, and let's bring this align window up here. Okay, and now we can quickly go back to the project window and let's bring in a new brush stroke, which is 6.png, and we'll bring it into the timeline and let's place it right above the solid. And then just select the red solid and we're going to decrease the height again like this, and we're going to place it somewhere down here. Okay, and then let's select the layer again and hit S to see the scaling properties, and we are going to scale this up to maybe 160%. Yeah, and let's quickly place it somewhere near this white stroke, and we can manually stretch this layer and compress the height a bit like this, and then we'll simply change the track matte of this red solid to alpha matte, and now we have this reddish kind of brush in front of us. Okay, and now we can place it wherever we want, and then hit R, and we are going to rotate this by maybe -5 degrees. Okay, and let's place it like this, and then we'll select top 4 layers. Okay, and we are going to move it at the center of our composition like this. Okay, and now after this, what we'll do is we'll create a new composition. Basically, we're going to create a new map, so we'll call this as map 3, and with the same settings, hit OK. Oh, it's a square composition, so maybe I did not notice the height in the settings, which was supposed to be 1920. Okay, and then we're basically going to drop an image into the timeline, which I think is present under the texture folder, and yeah, this is the image gradient map.jpg. Just drag it into the timeline and then do a right click, go to new, and let's create a new adjustment layer, and on this layer we'll apply gradient ramp again. Okay, and we'll set the mode to multiply, and we are going to drag this darker area to the left and the brighter to the right. Okay, like this, and we are almost done with this map 3. And now let's quickly jump back to the story composition, go to the project window, and we are going to bring in our map 3 into the timeline like this, and then we'll select this very first layer, go to effects and controls window, we'll apply a gradient wipe onto the image, and we'll set this gradient layer to map 3 again, and let's quickly turn off the visibility of this layer as well. Okay, and then let's move the red layer to 20 frames and the image to maybe at 1 second. Okay, and then we'll place this time indicator at the start of the image layer, and then in the settings of gradient wipe, we'll quickly increase this transition value to 75% first of all, and then drop a keyframe, and then go to around 2 seconds and 20 frames, and we'll bring this value down to 5% only. Alright, and then hit U to see the keyframes, select both the keyframes, and then hit F9 to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor, select both the points again, and we'll hold shift on the keyboard and just drag it to the left and this one to the right, so that we can make this graph like this. Alright, and now what we'll do is we'll quickly create another composition, which we'll call it as image. Okay, and let's go back to the project window, and from the image folder we'll simply drag this image into the timeline and then hit S to see the scaling, and we'll basically scale down this image like this, and we can also move it a little bit to the right like this. Alright, and after this we'll quickly jump back into the story composition, and we are going to drag our image composition into the timeline like this. Alright, and now let's quickly scale up this image all the way to 180% like this. Okay, and we can of course move it wherever we want, so I'm gonna place it right here, and then let's introduce a new layer into the timeline, which is the second image from the brushes folder. So just drag it onto the top of the image layer, and then we can decrease the width like this if we want. And I think we can also change the track matte of this image to alpha matte. And now let's select this brush, and let's move it something like this. And we can of course move the image if we want for a better look. Okay, and yeah, I think this is okay. All right, and now we will apply the gradient wipe effect onto the first layer, and then for the second one we will search for an effect which is black and white. Okay, and just do a double click to apply that up, and then we'll quickly select the first layer again, and in the settings of gradient wipe we will first of all change the gradient layer to map 2, and then make sure to stay at the very beginning of the layer, and then let's increase this transition value to 15%, then drop a keyframe and then go to around 2 seconds, and we will decrease this value back to 0. Okay, and then I think we can still decrease the width of the brush stroke like this, and we can move this layer a bit like this. Okay, all right, now it's perfect. And let's move the second layer to 20 frames and the first one to 1 second and 15 frames. All right, and then hit U to see the keyframes. Just select both of them, hit F9 on the keyboard to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor. Just select these 2 points, hold shift on the keyboard, and we are going to bring this point all the way to the left and this one a bit to the right like this. Okay, and now what we will do is we'll go back to the project window, and let's quickly bring in our image into the timeline once again, and let's place it at the very top. Okay, and let's quickly apply the same black and white effect on this one as well. All right, and then just do a right click on the image, go to transform, and let's flip this image horizontally like this. And then let's get back to the project window, and we are gonna bring this texture 2 into the timeline, and we'll put it on top of the image. And then let's set this track matte of the image to alpha matte. Okay, and after this we'll search for an effect which is nothing but the same that we applied earlier, which is gradient map. Just drag it onto the texture, and then let's change the gradient layer to map to first of all, and then make sure to stay at the very beginning of your timeline, and then change this transition value to 15%, drop a keyframe, and then go to around 1 second and 15 frames. Let's bring this value down to 0. Okay, and let's move the image layer to 20 frames and the texture to maybe 1 second. Okay, like this. And now we will select the image layer, and we are going to scale this up a little bit like this. Okay, and then let's move the time indicator forward in time right here, and then we can simply hit T on the keyboard, and let's decrease the opacity until we're able to see the underlying layer. All right, and now let's quickly create a mask. So we'll grab this rectangle tool and we will make a mask, but first let's position our image as well. Okay, and now I'm gonna place it something like this. Okay, and I think we can still decrease this maybe up to 125. All right, and now we can move it accordingly. So just place it wherever you want. Okay, and now let's grab this rectangle tool and create a mask something like this. Okay, and now we can quickly increase the opacity back to 100 like this. Okay, and now if we take a look on the preview, we will find that both of our images are actually animating from bottom to top, as we can see, and it doesn't even look that much interesting. So in order to fix it, what we'll do is we'll just rotate our first layer by minus 180 degrees like this, and now if we take a look again, one of our image will automatically start appearing from top to bottom like this. Okay, and this looks much better now. So after this, what we'll do is we'll quickly create a new solid, and it's fine if we again just call this layer as red solid, and then for the color we'll again use the hex code which we have been using throughout the animation, which is CA2047, and then hit OK. Alright, and let's again go back to the project window and quickly bring in the same texture2.png on top of the red layer. Okay, and now we'll change the mode of the red layer to multiply and also the track matte to alpha matte. Okay, and after this we'll select our first layer, which is texture2.png, and just drag the same gradient wipe effect on top of it. And then in the settings we'll quickly change the gradient layer to map 2, and then we'll make sure that we are at the very beginning of our timeline, and then we'll increase the transition completion value to 25%, and then drop a keyframe, and then go to around 2 seconds and 20 frames, and we'll set this value back to 0. Okay, and then hold shift and select the second layer, and we're going to move both of them to 20 frames, which is right here. Okay, and after this we'll quickly modify our red layer. So just select it and let's see the layer first of all, and then we are basically going to decrease the width like this. Okay, and also the height as well, like this. And don't forget to rotate our texture 2 again by minus 180 degrees. Okay, and then we'll simply place our red solid wherever we want. So I'm gonna place it right here. Okay, and in the same way we'll select our texture 2 layer and then decrease the width and just place it right below the red layer, and I'm gonna decrease the width as well. All right, like this. And now if we take a look on the preview, we will have this kind of animation on our red layer, and this looks pretty cool. Okay, and now let's go back to the project window, and we'll basically bring in our image comp into the timeline, and on top of this we'll use the same texture to image like this. Okay, and then let's quickly change the track matte of the image to alpha matte, and then on the texture 2 let's apply the same gradient wipe effect like this. And then in the settings we'll first of all change the gradient layer to map 2. Okay, and then we'll make sure that we are at the very beginning of our timeline, and then let's increase this transition completion value to 25%, and then drop a keyframe and go to around 2 seconds and 20 frames, and we're gonna basically bring this value back to 0. Okay, and then just hold shift on the keyboard and select our image layer, and we are moving both of them to 20 frames like this. Okay, and now we will only select our image layer and then hit S to see the scaling property, and let's just scale it up to maybe 120%. Okay, and I think we can still increase a bit more to 125. All right, and now let's hit T on the keyboard, and we're basically going to decrease the opacity so that we can see the other two images. All right, and let's place it on the blank area like this. All right, and we will just grab this rectangle tool and let's make a mask again on this image like this. All right, and now we can again hit T and let's increase the opacity back to 100%. All right, and now what we'll also do is we'll just select our texture 2 and let's decrease the width like this, and let's place it right on top of the image and a bit like this. All right, and now if we take a look, this is what we have so far, and this is what we really needed. Okay, and now it's time to create a text layer for our animation, and for that we need a new composition. So I'll quickly create a new one, and we're going to call it as text, and you can of course call it whatever you want, and it's completely fine if you want to keep this dimension same, which is 1080 by 1920, but for the sake of this tutorial I'm gonna make the reverse, which is 1920 by 1080, and we're not going to touch any other settings. Hit OK, and then let's quickly grab our text tool and let's type in anything you want. So I'm gonna type the same text that we saw in the preview, which is grunge stories. Okay, and let's place it using the line window at the center of our composition like this, and also hold controller command on the keyboard and double click on the span behind tool to shift the anchor point right into the center. Okay, and after this we'll decrease the font size a bit like this. Okay, and then let's create a duplicate of the layer and let's put it under the first one, and we'll also drag the duplicated layer right here. Okay, and then just do a double click and let's change the text to whatever you want. So I'm typing for Instagram. Okay, and then just select all of the letters, and for the color we'll use an hex code which is CA2047. Okay, and we don't need this text to be bold, and we'll change the font style to regular like this. Okay, and I think we can still have a little bit of gap between the text. Okay, and yeah, this much is fine, and we can now increase the kerning a little bit like this. Okay, and now what we'll do is we'll just create a new adjustment layer and then go to effects and presets window, and we will search for an effect which is roughen edges. Just do a double click to apply that up. Okay, and then in the settings we will make sure that the roughen is already selected for the edge type, and then for the border we'll decrease down this value down to 2.20. okay, and then for the edge sharpness we'll increase this value up to 3.75. no need to change the fractal influence, and we will increase this scale amount to 238. And then finally we will simply hold Alt or the Option key on the keyboard and click on the stopwatch of evolution, and then in the expression area we'll simply write an expression which is time times 1000. okay, and this will keep on animating the roughen edges forever, as you can see. So you just have to play around with the settings so that you can see what works best for you. Okay, so now let's quickly move on with our work. So we have to now go back to this story composition, open up the project window, and we'll quickly bring in our text composition into the timeline like this. Okay, and then we can hit S to see the scaling, and let's scale down a little bit like this, and we can place it down here. Okay, and we are almost done with our Insta story because we are only going to add one more composition, and after that we'll be just doing some final color corrections and adjustments here and there. Okay, right, so now let's quickly go to this composition, click on new, and let's call this composition as I don't know, maybe loop images. Okay, and we'll keep the settings same, which is 1920 by 1080. This is the horizontal composition, and then hit OK. All right, and then from the project window we'll simply select a couple of images, which is texture 1, 2, 3, and 4, and just drag it into the timeline like this. Okay, and then just do a right click, go to transform, and click on fit to comp width. Okay, and then we'll select the bottom 3 layers, hit R to see the rotation, and we'll rotate all of them by 90 degrees. Okay, and we can just manually scale down same as the height of our composition and also the width like this. And I think we have to do the same thing with our first layer. And now all these layers are ready. Okay, and now let's quickly bring up the opacity by pressing T on the keyboard, and then we'll make sure that we are at the very beginning of our timeline, and then drop a keyframe, and then we'll simply expand our timeline like this so that we can see the frames very clearly. And then let's move the time indicator at 1 frame and drop a keyframe again at 100%, and then let's go to 3rd frame, drop a keyframe again, and for the 4th one we'll decrease the opacity down to 0, and then we'll move the time indicator on 12th frame and we'll drop a keyframe at 0 again. Okay, and now we'll simply hold Alt or the Option key on the keyboard and click on the stopwatch of opacity, and in the expression area we'll simply write an expression which is loop out inside parenthesis we'll type equals to cycle. Okay, and make sure to put the cycle under the double quotes, right? And now just click anywhere outside this expression area, and through this expression we are basically telling After Effects the type of loop to run, and that's why we have mentioned a parameter that is type equals to cycle, right? And this is one of the simplest form of expressions in After Effects and also self-explanatory, right? So after this we'll quickly just copy the entire expression and then select the second layer, hit E2 times on the keyboard to open the expression area and paste the entire expression, and do the same thing for the third layer, paste the expression, and also on the fourth layer as well. Okay, and now let's quickly move our second layer to 3 frames and the third one to 6 frame and the last one to maybe 9 frames like this. Okay, and now just select all of the layers, hit U to close them, and if we do a scrub preview, we will see that all of our images are basically animating in a loop, and this will go on forever, and it's only because of the loop expressions we have written for every layers, right? Makes sense? And this is the pretty much entire function of the expressions we have used in this composition. All right, so once we are done in this comp, we'll quickly go back to our story composition, and then from the project window let's drag in loop images comp into the timeline, and we'll place it right at the very top. And on top of this comp or this layer, we'll quickly bring in our animate composition into the timeline, right? And then let's quickly change the mode of loop images to overlay and the track matte to alpha matte, and then we will also hit R to see the rotation, and let's rotate this by 90 degrees because our composition is a vertical composition like this. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll also hit T to see the opacity, and we're basically going to bring this value down to 25% like this. All right, and now we can see our images animating at the very top, right? And this looks pretty cool, right? So after this we will create a new adjustment layer and we'll hit enter to rename it, and let's call this as maybe Posterize time. Okay, and then we'll go to the effects and presets tab and search for the same, which is Posterize time again, and just drag this effect onto the adjustment layer. And then in the settings we'll quickly decrease this frame rate down to maybe 15. Okay, and you can of course go with whatever value you want. Okay, and basically the purpose of using this posterized time is only to have that stop motion kind of feel in our animation, which works just like a frame rate. That means the higher the value, the smoother your animation will be, and the lower the value, the more choppier it will be. And it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? So after this, what we'll do is we'll just create one last layer, which is nothing but a null object, and then make sure the anchor point is right at the center of the null object, and then just do a right click on the null object and we'll click on the invert selection, and we'll parent all of the selected layers to null object like this. And I think we can decrease the opacity of loop images maybe by 5%, so let's keep it at 20, and let's close the layers which are open first of all. Okay, and after this what we'll do is we will basically bring up our brush strokes that we have behind the image just by selecting the layers from 14 to 19, and we'll place it right under the text layer like this. Okay, and after this we're only going to do some final corrections here and there in our animation. Okay, so now let's move into the text composition and then select our first layer, which is Grunge Stories, and then open up the character tab, and we are basically going to increase the font size like this, and then just select the other layer which is for Instagram, and let's place it accordingly. Just place it wherever you want according to your preferences. Okay, and then we are basically going to decrease the font size like this, and let's move it accordingly. So I'm going to place it right here. Okay, And by the way, the font that we are using, Product Sans, is a free font available on the internet, or you can also download it from the link in the description. The choice is all yours. Alright. So once done, we will go back to the story composition, and then the text looks too big in this composition, so I think we might have to decrease the font size again, just a touch like this, okay? And also the other layer, and we can of course place it wherever we want. So I'm going to place it for the last time right here. And now let's go back to the story composition, and now it looks perfect, okay? And after this, we'll select our sixth layer, which is 6.png, and let's place it right under the Grunge stories, our first text. And we can also hit R to see the rotation, and we can set this value to 0, so the brush stroke looks pretty horizontal like this, okay? And we can of course stretch or modify the layer accordingly, right? And then I think we should also stretch the width a little bit like this, okay? And after this, we'll quickly select a layer number 8 and 9 and just drag it under the text layer. And then we will again select the sixth layer and then hit R to see the rotation, and let's rotate it, and we'll keep it horizontal like this, okay? And now if we don't want to see this line in the brush stroke, we can simply change the gradient layer to map 3, and now we can of course place it wherever we want. So I think we should also increase it like this, okay? And now let's go back to the text composition and then just select the third layer and increase the font size a bit like this and decrease the kerning back to 0, and let's make this font bold. And I think we should place it right here so that we can see this text on top of the white brush. And I think just place it a bit up like this, okay? And now I would say this looks really cool, right? And once we're done with the text layer, we'll basically select the right image, which I guess is the 19th layer right here, and then hit S to see the scaling property, and let's scale down the image like this, okay? And then let's move it right here like this. You can of course place it according to your preference, but I'm going to place it something like this, okay? And after this, what we'll do is we will go back to the project window and let's bring in our texture 2.png right on top of the text layer, because we still haven't applied a gradient wipe effect on our text layer, okay? And then change the track matte of the text to alpha matte, and then on the texture we'll go back to the effects and presets tab and just drag the same gradient wipe effect on top of the texture, okay? And then in the settings, we'll quickly change the gradient layer to map 3, and we will also hit S to see the scaling, and let's scale down first of all, and we can decrease the width like this, and let's place it right on top of the image like this, okay? And after this, we'll hit R to see the rotation, and let's rotate it by minus 180 degrees, okay? I think we can just type it like this. And once done, we'll make sure that we are at the very beginning of our timeline, and then let's first of all increase the transition completion value to 40, or let's keep it at 35%, okay? And then drop a keyframe and let's go to around 2 seconds and maybe 5 frames, and we'll set this value back to 0 like this. And we will also move this layer a bit forward in time to maybe around its 20 frame, okay? And if the text is still visible, we'll simply increase this transition value to around 55% to make it disappear like this, okay? And then we'll also hit U to see the keyframe. Just select both the keyframes we have dropped and then hit F9 on the keyboard to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor and then select both the points, and we'll make this graph like this, okay? And let's go back to the timeline, and now if we do a scrub preview to see what we have made so far, and everything looks pretty cool, but it seems like there is one more layer that needs to be adjusted before we finalize it, okay? And that is the layer 11th, okay? So we will hit U to see the keyframes, and we'll move the last one a bit forward in time to maybe around 2 seconds, okay? And just select both of them again, and hit F9 on the keyboard to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor and just select this point, and we'll make this graph something like this. Okay, and after this what we'll do is we'll quickly move this layer to around 2 seconds only, which is right here. Okay, and it is better if we change the gradient map for this 7.png to map 2, which is nothing but the gradient map for this white brush. Okay, now let's move the texture to .png somewhere right here, and then we'll select text layer and simply move it to 20 frames and also the layer below it, and then we'll select the layer number 13 and then hit U to see the keyframes, and we'll first of all bring this last one a bit forward in time, and then just select both of them, hit F9 to easy ease them, and then go to the graph editor and just select the right point or the right handle, and then hold shift and just drag it all the way to the left like this. Okay, and now the time has finally come to take a look on what we have produced till now. Okay, so let's place the time indicator at the very beginning and change the magnification ratio to fit and the resolution to full, and then just hit a spacebar on the keyboard. And yes, here we are with our finalized grunge Instagram story, and this looks super cool, right? And we have just witnessed the entire concept of mastering the art of grunge so that you can leave a lasting impression on your audience. So just go on and play around with the settings, add your own creativity, add your own details, and tell your stories like never before. So yeah, that's a wrap up for today guys, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you really enjoyed learning today's animation. And if you really did, then make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and also press the bell icon so that you never miss any upcoming tutorials. And if you're searching a template for a video projects, then please do visit our official website where you will find a lot of things to learn about, but you don't have to consume everything at once. Instead, just go for the things that you think will add value to your work, and you will also find a bunch of free and useful resources to download so that you can learn at your own speed. And one more thing, if you're still not a part of our community, then please do not forget to join our mailing list by subscribing us on the website. So what are you waiting for? Go on and explore your website. And lastly, don't forget to follow me as Motion Street on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, keep dreaming, keep creating. Peace out.